Title in office. I watched the recording from the hidden camera as my cheating wife and her sisters returned from the cruise. Poured the wine and said calmly that I was taking antibiotics, and a man I slept with gave me gonorrhea. At that moment, I decided to release the real apocalypse. Dark clouds gathered outside the office window, reflecting the chaos in my mind. The Zurich sky stretched out in front of me, the canvas of glass and steel that had once inspired my ambitions now feeling cold and lifeless, like my marriage. I leaned back in my chair, my hand hovering over the mouse, debating whether to play the security footage from the living room camera. I hadn't installed the cameras out of paranoia, but because Eliza had become increasingly distant over the past year. Where once she had been warm and engaging, she had become cold and distant. Late-night texts, whispered phone calls, and trips away with just the girls had become the new normal. I tried to convince myself that it was all unintentional, that it was just the strain of my demanding role as managing partner of a private equity firm that had created a gap between us. But deep down, I knew better. My hand trembled as I clicked play. The screen flickered, and there she was, Eliza walking into the house with the same carefree elegance. She carried a stylish designer bag, her skin glowing from the Mediterranean sun, which I had never shared with her. She poured herself a glass of red wine, sat down on the marble kitchen island, and took a contemplative sip. Then she said, "I'm taking antibiotics. One of the guys I was sleeping with gave me gonorrhea," and my heart stopped. I rewound and rewound, hoping I had heard it wrong, but the truth was clear once again. She spoke about the weather in the same calm, detached tone, and every syllable was like a dagger stabbing into my brain. At that moment, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. She had destroyed the foundation of trust between us, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. The next morning, I drove to my office in silence. When I arrived, there were already white knuckles on the steering wheel. Revenge is not just about justice. It's also about precision, about completely destroying someone so that they can never recover. In my world, the cruel world of finance, precision is my forte. I started by collating all the information I knew about Eliza's life outside of marriage. Her closest confidants, the places she frequented, and even the name of the sister who had accompanied her on the cruise. My assistant Karina, discreet and loyal, had flagged Eliza's recent transactions while I sifted through the data. A picture was gradually emerging. Eliza had not been on a boat trip with her sisters at all. The receipts pointed to a luxury resort on the island of Mykonos, a haven of indulgence and pleasure. The costs for the plane tickets, the dinners, and the spa treatments had been charged to an account she thought I would never notice. Then there was the name Nikolai Grigoriev, a freelance photographer who liked to photograph not just landscapes, but other things as well. His name had appeared more than once on her bank statements, with the payments listed as private meetings. I leaned back in my chair, my vision blurred at the edges. If Eliza wants to play games, she has picked the wrong opponent. The days following Eliza's return from her sister's house felt like a foggy nightmare. I organized my life as usual: morning meetings, high-stakes negotiations, dinner invitations, while my mind was fixed on the betrayal I had discovered. But I needed more. A few clues were not enough if I was to confront her. I needed incontrovertible proof. I begin by tracking her steps. The first breadcrumb is a receipt from the Miko resort, built under an unfamiliar name, Nikolai Grigorenko. The resort is far from the ordinary accommodation Eliza described when she returned, poetically describing bonding with her sisters over sunset cocktails. Nikolai's name stuck in my mind. Who was he, and why did Eliza think I wouldn't notice? I called an old friend, a cybersecurity expert, who owed me a debt for accessing Eliza's email and social media accounts. The truth began to emerge in fragments, encrypted whispers. I didn't know that her inbox contained flight itineraries, private messages, and correspondence with Nikolai. The tone of their exchanges made my stomach churn. I counted the days until I saw you again. Last weekend was unforgettable, but the most damning was Nikolai's social media. His carefully curated Instagram feed showed vibrant sunsets, expensive wines, and Eliza's hand wearing an emerald ring, a token of my eternal gift to her. The caption read, "Art is capturing fleeting beauty. Stolen moments indeed, it was stolen." I hired a private investigator, who meticulously delivered everything I needed within 72 hours. A photo of Eliza and Nicola laughing together during dinner at a beachfront restaurant. surveillance footage of them entering a luxury suite together late at night, and when I examined the evidence more closely, I realized that this was not just an affair, but a carefully planned second life. Anger turned to determination. I would not simply accuse her, but confront her with the truth, the inescapable truth. I would make her feel the betrayal she had given me. Planning revenge became an obsession in my life. Success requires strategy, vision, and execution. I intended to use every skill I had honed over decades to dismantle the facade Eliza had created. She had gambled on my ignorance. She had underestimated me. The first step was financial. I froze her access to all shared accounts, leaving just enough for her to use without her noticing. Every transfer tightened the noose around Nicola. Every frivolous expense was now a wall of rejection. I transferred the funds to a private trust account, ensuring that she could no longer spend a single penny without my permission. The second step was social. I contacted our inner circle of friends, colleagues, and even her family, and made some subtle inquiries about her recent travels. No accusations, just harmless questions that planted the seeds of doubt. By the time I was done, rumors about her fidelity were spreading like wildfire, long before the confrontation. Step 3. Professional Eliza was at home in Zurich high society, and her reputation as a charity organizer and philanthropist had gained her access to elite circles. I compiled a dossier of her indiscretions, her affair with Nicola, the misuse of funds, and even the lies she had told to her closest friends. I made sure that the information was delivered to the hands of the key figures who had supported her venture. Her carefully crafted image was about to collapse. The final step was personal. I edited the footage and evidence into a devastating montage. It began with photos of her and Nicholas, moved on to bank statements, and ended with surveillance footage of late-night trysts. The video was concise yet comprehensive, a portrait of betrayal that left no room for denial. With everything in place, I set the stage for the confrontation. This was not just about exposing her lies, it was about taking back the control she had taken from me. She had made a fool of me, and I was going to show her she was wrong. On the night of the confrontation, I had set the house up carefully. The lighting was soft, and the table was set for an intimate dinner. Everything was normal, until Elisa pushed through the door, her high heels making a crisp sound on the polished wooden floor, her designer bag swinging gently at her side. "What is all this?" she asked, glancing at the wine I had opened. Her tone was soft, but her eyes betrayed unease. To me, it was just a quiet evening for the two of us. I replied, "It's been a while." She smiled with obvious relief and sat at the table for a while, eating with us. I let myself remember the woman I fell in love with, the woman I thought I knew, but every laugh, every sip of wine, every glance she gave me now felt like a lie. Halfway through dinner, I put down my fork and leaned back in my chair. "Elisa," I begin, in a steady voice, asking her how the cruise was. She pauses her glass at her lips and says, "It was beautiful. The Amalfi Coast is really beautiful." I ask a little too quickly, "How do you know?" I tilt my head because I've been on some details that seem to suggest you spent most of your time on the island of Mykonos. Her hand trembles slightly as she sets down her glass. "What are you talking about?" Instead of responding, I pulled my phone out of my pocket and pressed play. I placed it on the table, turning it so that she could see the screen clearly. The first photo appeared, of her and Nicola at the beachfront restaurant. His arm was casually draped over her shoulder. Each time a new section of the video played, and when it finally ended, there was silence in the room, only the faint hum of the air conditioning. "Magnus," she whispered shakily, "I can explain." "No," I interrupted her coldly, and said, "You can't. You lied to me, Elisa, and you took everything I gave you, my trust, my love, my loyalty, and you threw it all away." She reached out and took my hand, tears streaming down her face. "Please, Magnus, it was a mistake. I'm lonely, and you're not." I pulled back and said, "Don't you dare try to involve me. I've always been good to you, and this is how you repay me." She cried and begged for forgiveness, but I had already made up my mind. "You have to pack your things this week." I got up from the table and said, "I don't want to see you in this house anymore." As I left the room, her cries followed me, but I didn't turn back. This was her fault, and she had to bear the consequences. The fallout began as Eliza climbed pale and tearful into her car. I watched through the window as the engine purred weakly and disappeared into the cold night air. But I wasn't finished yet. I had gathered enough evidence to destroy her social and professional standing over the next 48 hours. I set the plan in motion. The first domino fell when I anonymously sent a video clip to several influential figures in Zurich's elite circles. Influential figures in Zurich's elite circles who had funded Eliza's charitable activities, worked with her on charity projects, and admired her innocent public image. Within hours, the rumors had turned into a storm. Over the weekend, her phone was inundated with calls and texts, some demanding an explanation, others cutting her off completely. The events she had organized were canceled and sponsors withdrew their funding without hesitation. Overnight, she became pariah, but the real destruction came from an unexpected source. Desperate to save face, Nicola posted an explosive post on social media, claiming that Eliza had forced him into an affair and portraying herself as the victim. The media gave the scandal a lot of coverage, and her name became synonymous with betrayal and shame. When I heard that her family had disowned her, I felt a pang of sadness, perhaps pathetic but fleeting. She had orchestrated her own downfall, and I had only helped. Months passed, and life began to settle into a new rhythm. The house was quieter, emptier, but not unpleasant. I threw myself into my work, rediscovering a sense of focus that I had lost in the chaos of the marriage breakdown. Deals were closed, partnerships flourished, and my reputation as a ruthless strategist grew. One evening, I returned home from the office and found a letter on the table by the door. The handwriting was unmistakably Elisa's. I hesitated, her name evoking emotions. I thought I could finally bury the past, but I opened it anyway. Magnus, the letter began, you were right about everything. I betrayed you and I paid the price. I will be leaving Zurich forever. I hope that with time you will remember the good times we had together and forgive me for ruining it. The letter ends with a plea for understanding, but there is no return address. I put it aside, feeling only relief. She was gone, and with her, a broken life that I no longer recognized. On a crisp autumn evening, the sunset casts a golden glow over the Zurich sky. I found myself at a charity gala, one of the biggest events of the year. This was the world that Eliza once ruled, but now her absence was a ruthless reminder of how quickly fortunes could change. As I sipped my champagne, I noticed a familiar face across the room, Nicolas. He looked different, his once confident demeanor replaced by an air of emptiness. He avoided my gaze, his shoulders slumped as he spoke to a young socialite desperate for attention. A smile appeared at the corner of my mouth. His fall had been swift, and unlike Eliza, he had no safety net. Magnus Adler. A voice interrupted my thoughts. I turned around and found a woman standing next to me, extending her hand in greeting. She was striking, confident, poised, and radiated intelligence, which immediately piqued my interest. I've heard so much about you. Her smile was warm and curious, she said. You've done wonderful work with the Adler Foundation. Thank you, I replied, shaking her hand. You are Isabella Marquez. Her eyes sparkled. I run the Marquez Foundation. I believe we may have common interests. We talked all night, her conversation refreshing, a break from the superficial small talk I was used to in the nightlife. That night, I realized a feeling I hadn't felt in months, a possibility. That night, when I got home, I sat in my study and reflected on the journey that had brought me here. Betrayal, revenge, fallout, all of it necessary for my new life. But now, standing on the precipice of a new chapter, I felt an unfamiliar calm. I opened my notebook, the one I used to record every step of my plan, and wrote the final words. Betrayal sharpens the mind, but rebirth heals the soul. As I closed the book, I whispered to the silence of the room, this is just the beginning. Thank you. By subscribing, you're not just following a channel, you're becoming part of a community that values insightful and meaningful storytelling. Together, let's continue exploring these heartfelt journeys. And don't forget to click the bell so you don't miss our next story.